Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is David Logan. I'm the chairman of the British Institute at Ankara. Welcome. We have an extremely distinguished guest this evening, who's first and most important as far as the Institute is concerned. This point of distinction is concerned. He's the vice president of the British Institute. I'm greatly honoured that he was prepared to assume that role. But Ambassador was educated at Boğaziçi University. He then took a second degree at the Free University of Brussels. He joined the Turkish diplomatic service in 1978. And for much of his career, he dealt with the Balkans, Central Europe, the Caucasus, Central Asia. And his first ambassadorial appointment was in 2001 when he was made ambassador to Azerbaijan, and then in 2004, ambassador to Iraq, clearly two extremely important posts. He was then Deputy Undersecretary for Bilateral Political Affairs in the ministry, and he's been ambassador here since 2010. So, as you can see, Ambassador Çevez has had an extremely distinguished career. We in London are extremely fortunate that such an experienced and able ambassador is with us here. I think he probably won't stay long enough to require multiple accreditation to Edinburgh as well as London, but we all hope he will be here for a long time. I'm delighted to introduce the ambassador, who will speak for about 20 or 30 minutes and then has kindly agreed to take questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, David. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to be here addressing you on an interesting topic, changing Turkish foreign policy in a changing world. First of all, let me express my gratitude to the British Institute at Ankara, of which I am a vice president. So you would always be ready to listen to me anyway. And also the British Academy for allowing us to have this meeting here in this hall. First, I would like to give a brief explanation about the development of Turkish foreign policy, starting from the proclamation of the Republic of Turkey, which means 89 years ago, and don't worry, it's not going to take so long. For that, I'm inclined to build my analytical look on 4 stages of the evolution of Turkish foreign policy. First, from 1923 to 1947, which is a period of low level of participation in international relations. Secondly, from 1947 to 1991, which is the Cold War period. Then from 1991 to 2007, which I consider as the post-Cold War period. And then, starting from 2007 onwards, a period of high level of participation in international relations. The most interesting stage, which deserves more attention, is, of course, the last stage, because it involves the time that we are currently living in. Therefore, I intend to refer to the first 3 stages rather briefly and focus more on the last one. Let me begin with the general characteristics of the first stage. The leaders of the young Turkish Republic, starting with 1923, pursued a foreign policy which did not involve Turkey much in international politics. After an exhausting string of wars, the founders were rather suspicious of alliances and therefore were not interested in extensive international engagements. Rather, they were interested in consolidating their own power and regime they had just built, and they also tried to reconstruct the economy that prolonged war had destroyed. Foreign policy formed under these considerations was characterized by a low level of involvement in international affairs. Turkey tried to resolve the remaining issues of the war through peaceful means, such as, for example, settling the status of Mosul and Kirkuk in the International Court of Justice, and regaining sovereignty over the Turkish states through negotiating the Montreux Convention. As the conditions for the World War II started to emerge, Turkey made alliances with the major contending parties, but tried to avoid conditions that would drag the country involuntarily into a war. Hence, Turkey managed to stay out of the Second World War. The second stage in the anatomy of Turkish foreign policy, which covers the period of 1947 to 1991, namely the Cold War period, could also be characterized as Turkey being a staunch ally of the Western camp, being a devoted member of NATO. Let us briefly remember the conditions which prepared the background for Turkey's membership. Toward the end of the war, the main features of the new world order began to take form, and Soviets expressed that they were interested in revising the Montreux Convention on the Turkish states and Turkey's borders in the east. Turkey declared war on Germany in 1944 and took part in activities leading to the establishment of the United Nations. Turkey initiated a transition from a single-party regime to multi-party system to confirm its commitment to democratic standards of the West. It also sent troops to Korea in 1950 to show that it would be willing to deliver on its commitments in a defensive alliance. And finally, in 1952, Turkey joined NATO. But joining NATO was not enough, and it was strengthened by further commitments because Turkey tried to be a part of all institutions that brought Western Europe together. It joined the Council of Europe in 1949, became a founding member of the OECD in 1961, and the OSCE in 1973. It applied for associate membership in the European Economic Community as it became operational in 1958 and obtained associate member status with the Ankara Treaty of 1963. Nevertheless, NATO was most critical linkage. NATO membership also enticed Turkey to work more closely with the United States because bordering on the Soviets and Soviet-friendly Syria and Iraq in its south, Turkey felt more exposed to security threats than some other members of the alliance. The third stage, which I characterize as the post-Cold War period, is a stage in Turkey's foreign policy where we begin to observe a more involved actor in international affairs. The end of the Cold War expanded the boundaries within which the members of the NATO alliance, including Turkey, could formulate their foreign policies. I have to underline, however, that Turkey's emergence as such an active country emanates from the pursuance of an important process of economic change that had implications for foreign policy. On January the 24th, 1980, Turkey got rid of a set of rules and regulations which were generally known to be designed to protect the value of the Turkish lira. The new regime removed exchange controls and aimed to render the Turkish lira a convertible currency in the long run. Coupled with the move from import substitution-oriented economic development to export-oriented growth policies, this major policy shift pressured Turkey to look for export markets and search for relationships that it had neglected earlier. Russia and countries of the Middle East, as well as others in different parts of the world, became targets of Turkish expansion as Turkey developed into a trading state, now shaping of its foreign policy accordingly. One of the main consequences of such changing Turkish foreign policy is the establishment of the regional Black Sea Economic Cooperation Scheme. It is also in those years that Turkey launched the summit meetings between the leaders of the Turkic language-speaking countries, which recently has been transformed into the Turkic Council. As Turkey's economy has registered major advances in the following years, its exports growing rapidly, Turkey has expanded the geographical scope of its relations. Nevertheless, during this period, Turkish foreign policy maintained its strong Western orientation. Turkey joined other allies in expanding its relations with former adversaries as well as building ties with newcomers to the international system. Let me underline here that this period has also begun to prepare a certain frustration among Turkish politicians and the general public due to a perception that its allies did not extend sufficient support to Turkey on two major issues, which were of great concern in Turkish politics. This is the battle against separatist terrorism and the Turkish position regarding Cyprus. In spite of that, however, successive governments did not challenge the principle that Turkey's fundamental interests lie with the West and preserve the Western connection as the priority in Turkish foreign policy. Accordingly, Turkey pursued with determination its goal of becoming a member of the European Union which culminated in 1999 in Turkey's being declared a candidate country for membership and the opening of accession negotiations in 2005. Turkey cooperated with the Allies in enforcing a no-fly zone in northern Iraq, sending troops to Afghanistan, and participated in peace-building and keeping efforts in Bosnia, Lebanon, and elsewhere. Let me now move on to the fourth stage, which is particularly interesting because it is still in the making and it's the period that we are living in. After the elections of 2007, and particularly after Professor Ahmet Davutoğlu became the Minister for Foreign Affairs in 2009, Turkey has begun to pursue a more proactive foreign policy line in its external relations. Turkey's economic performance and its outreach to new geographies also increased. In addition to the US and European countries with whom ties have historically been strong, new areas included the countries of the Balkans, the Middle East, North Africa, Iran, Central Asian republics, China, and even Latin America. Turkey has currently become the 16th largest economy in the world and the 6th largest in Europe. Questions of economic prosperity play a more important role in its foreign policy than in earlier times when security considerations were paramount. Particularly after 2009, Turkey has developed the foreign policy doctrine of zero problems with neighbors. Yesterday, we commemorated the first anniversary of the Egyptian Revolution. The so-called Tahrir spirit is a main reference to a sea change in the Middle Eastern and North African region, and we tend to define it as the Arab Spring. My terminology is Arab awakening. What we see today in the Middle East and North Africa is a continuation of the democratization of life, politics, and economics in the world, which started in Central and East Europe in the 1990s. It is the ending of anachronistic ancien regimes. It is the termination of dictatorships. It is the increased control and participation of the masses in politics. In other words, it is the beginning of an era of more transparency, more accountability, and more responsibility. This is why we are inclined to call this process the normalization of history. Let me briefly summarize the approach that Turkey has adopted regarding the popular movements in the Middle East and North African region. We emphasize the following points in order to ensure that the process of change takes place in this part of the world in an orderly fashion. First of all, sustainable security and stability is only possible through meeting the legitimate aspirations of the people. We strongly encourage our regional partners to announce and implement comprehensive reforms. Violence and use of force against people is unacceptable. Sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and political unity of each and every country in the region have to be preserved and respected. Transformation should be led and owned up by the respected peoples themselves. And we should not let these processes be hijacked by radicals who seek fomenting sectarian, ethnic, or ideological strife across the region. Today, Turkey tries to balance a variety of interests and considerations in the formulation and implementation of its foreign policy. It is no secret that the end of the Cold War and the ascendance of economic consideration in Turkey's external relations have guided Turkey to pursue an increasingly autonomous foreign policy while keeping within the broad framework of its alliance ties. In contrast to earlier times during the Cold War, in which Turkey's economic dependence on the Western alliance and its security needs made it safe to assume that Turkey would go along with the decisions of its major allies, now common action must be preceded by consultations and consensus building. This implies that there will be occasional differences on policy questions. Treating these differences as normal may be the best path to pursue in preserving the overall solidarity of the alliance relationship. This also implies that the alliance relationship is less comprehensive than it was during the Cold War and leaves room for all allies, including Turkey, to develop and implement relationships that are outside the concerns of the alliance. Now, I know that you are so enthusiastic to ask questions, but it is generally a very good prerogative of the speaker to preempt the questions. And I would just address a couple of them. Sometimes questions have been asked as regards whether Turkey is pursuing an Islamic or a neo-Ottoman policy, or is Turkey shifting away from the Western alliance? It should be remembered that the changes or emphasis on Turkish foreign policy are not confined to only Islamic countries, but includes countries like China, Russia, Balkans, and other geographies. In other words, Turkey's foreign policy complies with the existing foreign policy of its allies, and also perhaps complements it, particularly in a geography where it has a better understanding, hence a comparative advantage. It is also true that in Turkey, particularly in the social life, there is stronger reference to more conservative and religious rhetoric. But there is no indication that Islam as religion or Islamic countries, which do not constitute an integrated entity in any case, constitute the major factor on which Turkish foreign policy is made. Similarly, the fact that many countries near Turkey were part of the Ottoman Empire and the existence of a multiplicity of ties does not mean that Turkish foreign policy aims to reconstitute a zone around itself in which it prevails. Let me also address the issue of Turkey's relations with the European Union. Turkey's location presents a natural gateway between the European Union and Turkey's eastern and southern neighbors. Therefore, Turkey's accession to the European Union is a key strategic imperative for European integration, since it will certainly help the European Union become a much more effective actor in these neighboring regions. Moreover, European values and policies will certainly have far greater reach and thus will take root in a wider geography with Turkey as a member. As a matter of fact, Turkey and the European Union share the same values and have parallel objectives in foreign policy. Like the European Union, Turkey seeks to establish peace, stability, security, and democracy in the Middle East and North Africa, and assist these countries in their transition to democracy. This dictates us to cooperate further, since the synergy to be created by such cooperation would be first and foremost beneficial to the European Union. Turkey's immense potential to contribute to the European Union's global position and capacity demonstrates itself, especially during this period, when the winds of change in the Middle East and North Africa are producing a significant effect on the global scene. The recent developments in our southern neighborhood have revealed once again the difference that the European Union can make together with Turkey to provide a better future for the peoples of the region. We have to ensure that the ongoing transition and transformation process in the countries of the region will bring peace, stability and welfare through democratization, respect for human rights and the rule of law. Turkey is ready to share its experiences and make contributions which the countries of the region may require in their reform efforts. With its 2-century-long modernization efforts, vibrant democracy and economy, it can be a source of inspiration for these countries. Thus, Turkey can successfully complement the existing European Union policies. Now, here in the United Kingdom, we do not have any problem as far as the support to Turkish membership in the European Union is concerned. But I would very much appreciate if every British citizen would promote this interest of Turkey for the sake of European Union in the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. On his last point, perhaps he could return the compliment. I think that if all the citizens of Turkey could exhort the virtues of European Union membership for the British, that would be a useful cause to serve. As I said, Ambassador Chebria very kindly said he'd answer some questions. Who would like to ask the first one? One there first? Yes.
I wanted to ask you, I just wanted to ask you to mention or talk about the Kurdish problem and whether you think that a precondition for trying to solve the Kurdish problem that you have in your country would be to redraft your constitution and ensure that the representatives of the Kurdish people were able to engage in consultations over the constitution, because isn't this that is actually the greatest obstacle to you being accepted into the European Union? Thank you.
Oh, well, in your questions there are a couple of issues which have to be addressed separately, because I think they are not all very much interconnected. First of all, the Kurdish issue is not the main reason why Turkey is having difficulty in the European Union membership. There are other difficulties that we are facing. It is perhaps the pursuing of an passionate policy of some of the leaders of the European Union to keep Turkey away from the European Union. I'm not going to mention who these passionate leaders are, but I'm sure you would be able to drive them. It is, unfortunately, very much contradictory to the Copenhagen criteria and the basic principles for any candidate to carry on the membership negotiations. There are so many other issues. You know that about 33 chapters have to be negotiated, but 18 chapters are blocked by at least 2 members of the European Union, and they don't have anything to do with the Kurdish issue. So it is a very separate thing. The second thing, I think the discussions about the new constitution is also an issue which is necessary for the Turkish society, Turkish people, and the continuation of the democratization process in Turkey. But it does not have an entire relationship with the Kurdish issue either. It is true that there are certain political parties in the parliament who are more lenient to the interests of the Kurdish citizens in Turkey, and since they are members of the Turkish parliament, of course they will be participating in the discussions in the drafting of the new constitution. Now, you ask whether there is a precondition to deal with the Kurdish issue. There is a very strong precondition. I think the terror has to stop. And it is the most important precondition, because if the terrorist PKK organization continues its attacks and continues to kill the citizens of the Republic of Turkey without any discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, because Kurds are also suffering from these attacks of terrorism, I think it will be very difficult for any Turkish government to address the issue in a sensible and a responsible manner. The main difficulty is because of the terrorist activities. I hope I have addressed all the aspects of your question.
Francis at the back there, in the middle.
Thank you. 2 questions, please. Could you please say something about your relations with Iran on the one hand and Israel on the other? Thank you.
What's in between? And these are 2 extremes. Well, first of all, with both countries, we had very good relations. With Iran, we still maintain good neighborly relations. Iran is a neighbor of Turkey with which we have direct border, and this border has not changed since 1639. It is quite exceptional in that geography, and perhaps also in several other parts of the world, that such a border exists for so long. We have enhanced economic and trade relations with Iran. I think the volume of trade is approaching $10 billion. We buy natural gas and oil from Iran because it's an alternative for us. Turkey is an energy dependent country and hugely imports oil and natural gas. And since we do not want to be dependent on only one source, which is Russia, because heavily we import from Russia, we also want to have alternatives. And that is the reason why Iran is also a major export country in terms of energy for Turkish needs. Now, I'm sure when you are asking Turkish relations with Iran, you have the question in your mind about the difficulty that Iran is facing with the international community relating to its nuclear file. We believe that every country has the right to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. However, we do not want to see a nuclear power in our neighborhood, which means we do not want Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. We are against the proliferation of nuclear weapons in our immediate neighborhood. We want a nuclear-free Middle East, and that's the reason why we have been always reaching out to the Iranians and suggesting that the talks between P5+1 should be transparent, should be constructive, and Iran should deliver and behave responsibly. Because Iran is a member of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and if there is a need for observation in the Iranian territory by the IAEA or the United Nations, we suggest that Iran should be open to all these demands for inspection. Now, as far as Turkish relations with Israel is concerned, we had fantastic bilateral relations. Turkish-Israel relations has been actually exemplary in the Middle Eastern region, because Turkey was the only country which maintained, as a member of the Organization of Islamic Conference, which maintained its embassy without any interruption in Tel Aviv, in Israel. Jews and Turks have long traditional historic relations. It is in the 15th century that the Jews, when they were expelled from Europe, from Spain particularly, they were received by the Ottoman Empire. So all these, in a way, suggest that the Turks and Jews do not have any kind of enmity, and they have very good relations. But unfortunately, in the last couple of years, the Israeli government's approach and code of conduct has resulted with a sort of deterioration of our bilateral relations. The main turning point is, of course, on the 31st of May 2010, the killing of 9 Turkish citizens in the flotilla, which was on its way to Gaza. It is the first time in peacetime that Turkish citizens, in peace, the Turkish citizens have been killed by the uniformed soldiers of an allied country. This is something that no country in the world could accept. And this is the reason why we have been asking the Israeli government to pay a condemnation,
Apologize.
Well, apologize, first of all, apologize, and also compensation. And it is also necessary for Israel to change its policy vis-à-vis the Palestine, the Gaza Strip. This has not happened, unfortunately, and this is the reason why we are unable to develop our relations currently with Israel. Now, Iran and Israel are the two extremes, and I asked you what is in between. In between, there is also a vast geography with which we are also having some troubled relations currently.
Who's next?
Helen Wallace, British Academy. Ambassador, thank you for your very thoughtful remarks, and I'd like just to push you a little bit further on the Iran-Israel and your...
East to the west, which one?
Your extremely difficult neighbourhood. Let's leave aside the question of when you join the European Union, because these issues are more pressing, because they're today and not only tomorrow. If you were in the European Union, what would you be wanting the rest of us to do in relation to Iran and Israel? Because as I look at it, we're facing very, very challenging and dangerous scenarios, and wise words from Turks to help push the Europeans generally to make wise counsel would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think hosting of the P5+1 talks in Istanbul is something that both the P5+1 and Iran appreciate. That is simply because Turkey has created confidence both in the West, in the European Union, and also among the P5 members, but also in the perception of Iran. And Turkey is simply trying to find a solution to this difficulty that Iran is facing with the international community. Turkey has also taken the initiative with Brazil in 2010 to achieve the Tehran Declaration, which is still on the table actually, which is a very good opportunity and a document to start negotiations, but it is not happening. Now, I think I can safely state that my minister, my prime minister, my president can easily talk to their counterparts in Iran. And when they talk to each other, they understand because they come from the same geography, same culture, same religion, and same traditions. I think what Iran needs is perhaps to get certain reassurances as to its security. Probably the difficulty that we have been in and the policies that we have pursued have not been able to help us to open a kind of a good dialogue is simply because we have been focusing only on the nuclear file and only on the nuclear issue and only on the nuclear enrichment issue of Iran. Iran obviously wants to discuss other things, but in the West there has always been an approach to negotiate simply the nuclear file but not to address all the other issues. I think this is not very sincere, and probably Iran requires a kind of respect. That is the reason why we are having difficulty. And we are sharing this opinion and our experience with the Iranian counterparts with our allies. As far as Israel is concerned, the question, of course, suggested that as if Turkey were the only country which was having difficulty in its bilateral relations with Israel. I'm afraid that Israel is having a serious difficulty with the international community as well, because the current government, unfortunately, is pursuing a very nationalistic and a radical policy. And Israel is probably not behaving as a country of the region, but it's simply isolating itself as if it were a country in the region. So it's important to be a subject of the Middle East. If Israel remains as an object, then it wouldn't be helpful to its policies.
We know that the Cyprus talks have achieved very little result very recently in Green Tree. We also know that most of the Turkish Cypriots actually want a two-state rather than a federal solution because they feel they'll be overwhelmed by such a thing. And it's very interesting, actually, that recently, amongst the Greek Cypriots, there is a certain movement to beginning to appreciate that a two-state solution might be better for them. I won't go into the reasons now because they're a bit long and complex, but certain things have happened which are making them think, although they are very emotional about having a federation or one state, there are reasons, economic and other, which are making some of them think that a two-state solution might be better for them. Does Turkey have an open mind on this problem?
First of all, Turkey has always supported the Turkish Cypriot approach, which is mainly to reunite the island, and the Turks and the Greek Cypriots, as compatriots on the island, would become the co-founders of a partnership state. That has been the policy of the Turkish Cypriots, and Turkey has supported the Turkish Cypriot approach so far, and it will continue to do so. I'm afraid the Greek Cypriots have demonstrated this wish that you have mentioned in the referendum in 2004. Because in 2004, the Turkish Cypriots, with an overwhelming majority, voted yes to the Annan plan, and they simply confirmed their desire to get united with their Greek compatriots in the southern part of the island, whereas the Greek Cypriots voted overwhelmingly no to the Annan plan. And I think that was a rejection of a unified Cyprus already at that time. In spite of that, however, the Turkish Cypriots have been going on with the negotiations, and they are still doing their best to find a solution in a united Cyprus, and Turkey is supporting this policy of the Turkish Cypriots.
There's a question down there first.
William Bache. Mr. Ambassador, earlier today at the House of Commons at a committee meeting discussing the possible future scenarios for Afghanistan, suggested in a settlement that all Western or forces would leave the country, that only forces from Muslim countries, and I know Turkey doesn't like to be categorized that way necessarily, but they suggested that Turkey could lead some kind of peacekeeping mission military force in Afghanistan that would be recognized by all parties as legitimate. Could you comment on Turkey's vision for Afghanistan?
Mm-hmm. Well, Turkey has already assumed the command of the Kabul region 2 times, and I think we are currently again going on with the 3rd term as the regional commander in the Kabul region. Turkey has participated in the ISAF operation right from the outset, and we know that it is not only a military solution that we have to search in Afghanistan, we also have to search for a civil solution. That's the reason why we are not only training the Afghan security forces, but we are also reaching out to the police, and we are also training the police force in Turkey, and we have expanded our presence by means of provincial regional teams. We have now, in addition to Vardak, also another one in Cevizcan, Shibirgan. I think if the international community really wants to deal with the problems all over the world, we should look at those peacekeeping and peacemaking operations as the responsibility of the whole international community. We should not make any kind of diminishing characteristics of such peacekeeping operations as pertaining to a certain religion or to a sect or to a certain nationality, ethnicity. Otherwise, international community would simply be short of delivering its responsibilities. So I presume the international community in the final analysis will not decide to leave Afghanistan only to the peacekeeping forces of Muslim countries, but will continue to deliver its responsibilities. Having said this, however, I have to caution, we also, at the beginning of the 21st century, as now we have moved into the 2nd decade, we also have to consider, before intervening militarily in hot places, what we have done in Iraq, for example, in 2003, has not been very successful, I must admit. And it is now being widely discussed whether it was wise to leave Iraq in 2011. Now that there is a schedule for leaving the security to the Afghan National Security Forces as of 2014, we also have to look at the experience, and we have to draw conclusions from what we have been not achieving in Iraq.
Yes, please.
Naz Mazraf, Eurasia Group. Given your professional background and your knowledge of Iraq, how do you see the currently tense relations between Turkey and Iraq, and how do you see them as developing in the short term?
It is again very sad, and I very much regret that immediately after the departure of the American forces and immediately after the security and the future of Iraq is left to the Iraqi security forces, the confrontation between the two sects reappeared. This is frightening because I have also mentioned that as our look to the region is concerned, we do not want to see any confrontation between sects, between ethnicities, between nationalities, or between different groupings. I'm afraid this is again happening in Iraq. This is frightening, and that's the reason why my Prime Minister, my minister have been time and again repeating the danger of such confrontation and such discrimination. I would not like to mention names, but the current Iraqi administration and the leadership, unfortunately, is playing a very dangerous game. And it's not going to be disastrous for Iraq, but it will perhaps be also very serious for the whole region. That kind of a confrontation has to be avoided. The remarks made by the Turkish leadership do not wish to escalate this confrontation, but simply calm it down.
Next question, Chairman.
My name is Salim Memon from Haldian Society of Social Lawyers. I really welcome your commitment to human rights and democracy and participatory accountability. My question is this, that from experience all over the world is that when the other priorities fight terrorism and war on terror, but the experience in this country and elsewhere is that the war on terror does come in conflict with human rights in the sense that very often the net is cast very wide. And what begins to happen is that, yes, you arrest the terrorists, but you also begin to attack dissent within the country. All the countries have the same problem of not criminalizing legitimate political activities. And I wonder what Turkey is doing to avoid this particular trap that many countries are falling into. And I note with concern that recently Turkey has arrested 34 lawyers. And because I come from an organization of lawyers, we are in fact demonstrating and we are in fact appealing for you to consider that they should be freed. Because I see no reason why there could be lawyers who are quite important people in terms of society, in terms of what they do, should be locked up and should be under threat of imprisonment in Turkey. I think that you need to understand our concern is this conflict that arises between terrorism, fighting terrorism, and civil rights. And I think Turkey is in breach of civil rights as far as I'm concerned at this particular moment. So you can address that.
Now, it seems that you have a different opinion as far as terrorism is concerned, and this is not surprising because people are, of course, free to have their own opinions about certain political issues. My understanding is a group of people who want to change the territorial integrity of a country simply by use of force and by terror is a group of terrorists. It doesn't have anything to do with freedom fighters or any kind of other label. So from that point of view, we have a difference of opinion, and I think a majority of the world would probably accept my understanding, not yours. I do not have any information about 37 lawyers in prison, 34 lawyers. Frankly speaking, I'm not informed about 34 lawyers being in prison in Turkey, but it is unfortunately a fact that the judiciary process is going through a very serious transition in Turkey, and most of the difficulty emanates from the fact that there are so many cases which have to be taken in the courts, and there is not enough time for the judiciary people to address all these files, and there is a delay in the court processes. That is the main difficulty that now we are having. But it is also a part of the transition that the whole country, Turkey, is going through, and judiciary is also being reformed. That is also an issue which is now being addressed. But I think I did not say in my presentation that Turkey is a perfect country.
This question over there.
Ambassador, you mentioned the East European revolutions and compared them to the Arab Spring. How worried is Turkey about the risk of the Arab Spring movements leading to increased instability and possibly religious conflict in some of the countries concerned? Because the omens from the ordinary man in the street, seen from here, don't look very good at the moment.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I mentioned the place of the Central and Eastern European transition and the demolition of Warsaw Pact and of the former Soviet Union and, of course, former Yugoslavia, simply because I wanted to make a reference to the beginning of a certain democratization process in our immediate neighborhood. I don't see that what has happened in 1990s in Central and Eastern Europe is comparable with what is now happening in Middle East and North Africa. They have different characteristics. But the main essence, which is common for all of them, is people are looking for democratization, people are looking for civil rights, liberties, and people are looking for transition into a prosperous life. That is the main characteristic. Now, what is happening in the Middle East and North Africa is very important to observe, and it's not going to settle down perhaps in a couple of years. It is going to be a permanent transition, maybe for several decades to come. The difference is simply because in the Middle East and North Africa, I'm afraid, contrary to the Central and East European countries, there is not an established or a former experience of political culture in terms of democracy, in terms of multi-party systems, pluralistic societies, and civil liberties. That is the difficulty. So now, in the Middle East and North Africa, it is a whole process of building and making new institutions. The new elected governments, starting with Egypt, for example, will go through a very serious test. And it will only be seen whether they have been successful or not after several years. What is the test here? I think they have to reach out to all the existing groups without any discrimination as to sect, nationality, religion, gender, and without making any separation, to respect the rights of the minorities in spite of the fact that they may have the majorities. Now, in Egypt, apparently, the Islamic-oriented and those political parties who have Islamic tendencies have obtained the majority. But Egypt is a mosaic society and it has a very long tradition of multiculturalism. If this is neglected by the new governments, I think it will not be a successful result. So this is the reason why I particularly emphasize the importance of non-discriminative approach. It's not going to be visible in a couple of years. We will only be able to understand whether these processes have been successful or not. It is also important to underline the characteristic of democracy. I did not mention Turkey presuming itself as a model for the region, and I don't believe that any country could become a model for any country in other parts of the world. I simply wanted to underline the general characteristics of the Turkish Republic from 1923 and its secular constitutional characteristic, which is also something that my Prime Minister underlined during his address to the masses in Tahrir Square when he was visiting Cairo. Islam and democracy is compatible, it is possible, and Turkey is the example.
We're slightly running out of time, so I'd like to group some questions if I might. I think there were two down there. One, and then was there another one back there? No. Okay, in that case, one there, and then Jonathan. If we could
Thank you. You gave us the big sweep of history from 1923, and we're now in a fourth phase. Can I push you a little bit more on that? What is the nature of this? Things seem to be changing. The big picture is changing. Support for EU membership within Turkey is falling. The great powers themselves are declining. The EU is losing some of its attractive nature. Within the European continent, Russia is becoming a more powerful player. So in this picture, perhaps it's time to look to a new vision of a multipolar Europe, Turkey, Russia, the EU, in alliance, not against anybody, but in other words, a new picture of a pan-European movement in which Turkey could play a hugely important part, as it always has done in the past.
Mm-hmm. Well, the multipolar world is already there. I think after the Cold War, in the post-Cold War environment, there have been new emerging economic powers, particularly in different parts of the world. A major characteristic of today's world is, I think international affairs is not going to be defined in Eurocentric terms anymore. It is shifting more to the east. It is becoming more and more important to look at the emerging powers in the Far East, in Asia, and there will be a stronger reference to East. Look at India, for example. Look at China. China and India together in the year 2030 will produce more than 30% of the world GDP. So it is, in a way, shifting the interest of world politics from Europe to the East. It is already a multipolar world. But when we look at this new multipolar system from Turkey's point of view, we simply want to maintain our role as a regional pivotal country in the Middle East, in Eurasia, in the Eastern Mediterranean. But we also look at new geographies and we develop our relations with those new geographies. But it is never an alternative for us as to our membership in the European Union. And frankly speaking, we are worried about the crisis that European Union is simply going through because we want to become a member of this European, and we do not look at European Union and say, oh my God, is this the Europe that we are planning to become a member? No, we do not say this because 47% of our volume of trade is with the European Union. And if the European Union does not succeed, it will also have repercussions for Turkey as well. So we do not want any kind of formulae less than full membership in the European Union. We are very patient, you know. We have been aiming at becoming a member of the European Union since 1963 when we signed the Ankara Agreement. And I know that in the British public, the Turkish patience has been very much appreciated, but there are others who are still testing our patience. We will continue.
And lastly, Jonathan.
I think this is just a foreign policy question. In this country at the moment, the European Court of Human Rights is rather newsworthy. Could you just give us an insight into relations between the European Court of Human Rights and Turkey, the Turkish attitude? Is the court doing a good job? Does it have effects inside Turkey? And vice versa, is Turkey doing a good job in giving effect to what the European Court of Human Rights decides?
I think I have to admit that Turkey does not have a very good record in the European Court of Human Rights. There are so many files, and when you look at the statistics, Turkey is very high in the ranking. But it is a process which is going on in Turkey. I mentioned that the judiciary is also having a very serious reform, and this is of course going to result with Turkish amelioration of the judiciary system, which will also have its implications for its relations with the European Court of Human Rights. Turkey is committed to the European Convention on Human Rights, and Turkey is trying to deliver and realize its responsibilities. It is, of course, a fact that the statistics show that Turkey is having some difficulty there. But let us be optimistic.
Well, I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking Ambassador Cevigers for a wonderfully lucid and informative and wise speech, and also really extremely helpful, informative, and frank replies to actually some very good questions from you all. Thank you very much indeed.